There are moments when everything in your life looks normal from the outside, yet something inside you feels strangely empty. You still laugh at jokes, still go to school or work, still scroll through your phone, still talk to people, but somewhere underneath all of it, there's this quiet feeling that you cannot fully explain. A heaviness that follows you even during good moments. And sometimes late at night, when the distractions finally slow down. You start wondering why you feel this way when technically nothing terrible has even happened. A lot of people today are secretly unhappy in ways that are difficult to describe clearly, partly because modern unhappiness rarely looks dramatic. It does not always appear as complete emotional collapse or obvious sadness. Sometimes it appears as numbness, exhaustion, constant distraction, lack of meaning, a quiet sense of emptiness that slowly spreads across everyday life until existing itself starts feeling emotionally flat. What makes this especially confusing is that many young people have been taught to view happiness as something connected to external achievement. They believe that once they improve themselves enough, become attractive enough, successful enough, productive enough, or socially accepted enough, they will naturally feel okay internally. So they spend years chasing goals while quietly assuming their unhappiness is temporary. But eventually some people reach the things they thought would fix them and realize the feeling is still there. That realization can be deeply unsettling because it forces a person to confront a possibility they've spent years avoiding. Maybe the problem is not simply the absence of success, attention, relationships, or achievement. Maybe the problem is deeper than that. One of the biggest reasons so many people feel secretly miserable today is because modern life constantly overstimulates the mind, while emotionally undernourishing the person. Human beings are consuming more entertainment, more information, more social interaction, and more digital stimulation than ever before, yet many feel profoundly disconnected from themselves emotionally. This happens partly because distraction has become the default response to discomfort whenever boredom, loneliness, anxiety, insecurity, or uncertainty appears. There is almost always something available to immediately suppress it. Music, notifications, videos, gaming, endless scrolling, constant content. The modern world offers infinite ways to avoid sitting alone with your own thoughts. At first, this feels helpful. Distraction creates temporary relief. But over time, emotional avoidance creates a strange psychological consequence. People slowly lose touch with what they genuinely feel underneath the noise. And when a person becomes disconnected from themselves emotionally, life starts feeling strangely hollow, no matter how much stimulation surrounds them. There is also another layer to this problem that many people underestimate. Modern culture places enormous pressure on identity during adolescence and early adulthood. Young people today are expected to figure out who they are while simultaneously comparing themselves to thousands of other lives online every day. They are constantly exposed to idealized versions of beauty, success, productivity, relationships, wealth, confidence, and happiness. As a result, many people begin unconsciously building themselves around external validation rather than internal understanding. They shape their personality around what gets approval. They hide parts of themselves they fear will be judged. They perform versions of themselves that seem more socially acceptable. Eventually, they become so focused on managing perception that they lose clarity about what they actually want, value, or feel. This creates a painful disconnect between the outer self and the inner self. From the outside, someone may appear completely functional, social, and successful, while internally feeling emotionally exhausted from constantly performing. And because social media encourages people to present only the most polished parts of their lives, many individuals start believing they are the only ones struggling quietly. But underneath much of modern confidence is hidden insecurity. Underneath much of modern entertainment is emotional escape. Underneath much of modern busyness is avoidance. And perhaps the hardest part is that many people never fully stop long enough to notice it. What most people do wrong when they feel miserable is they immediately try to eliminate the feeling instead of understanding it. They search for faster distractions, stronger motivation, more validation, more productivity, more self-improvement advice, more stimulation. They treat unhappiness like a technical error that must be solved quickly, rather than a psychological signal that deserves attention. Some people attempt to outrun their emptiness by staying constantly busy. Others try to fill it through relationships, attention, or achievement. Some endlessly consume self-help content, hoping the next piece of advice will finally create permanent clarity. But emotional dissatisfaction often persists because the problem is not simply lack of optimization. It is lack of connection, connection to self, to meaning, to honesty, to stillness, to genuine emotional experience. There is also a dangerous habit many people develop where they judge themselves harshly for feeling unhappy at all. They compare their lives to people who appear worse off and conclude they have no right to struggle emotionally. This creates guilt on top of sadness, which only deepens emotional confusion further. But emotional pain does not always require dramatic external tragedy to exist. A person can feel deeply lost while technically functioning normally. The mind responds not only to survival, but to meaning, identity, connection, purpose, and emotional fulfillment. The real shift begins when a person stops asking, "How do I escape this feeling?" immediately, and starts asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" Because emotions are not random inconveniences. Often they reveal misalignment. A life built entirely around distraction eventually creates emptiness. A life built entirely around performance eventually creates exhaustion. A life spent constantly chasing validation eventually creates insecurity because self-worth remains dependent on external reaction. Understanding this changes the relationship people have with unhappiness entirely. Instead of viewing emotional discomfort as proof that something is wrong with them permanently, they begin seeing it as information, a signal that some part of their life, habits, environment, identity, or emotional world requires attention. This does not mean romanticizing suffering or turning sadness into identity. It simply means understanding that numbing yourself endlessly often delays the deeper understanding necessary for genuine emotional stability. There is also a quieter realization many people eventually reach. Happiness was never meant to be constant. Modern culture often presents happiness as a permanent emotional state successful people achieve somehow, but real psychological health is much more complex than continuous pleasure or positivity. Human beings are emotional creatures. They experience uncertainty, loneliness, confusion, grief, insecurity, and emptiness sometimes. The goal is not eliminating every difficult feeling permanently. The goal is learning how to experience emotions without becoming completely controlled or defined by them. And strangely enough, people often become emotionally calmer once they stop obsessively chasing happiness itself. Because much of modern misery comes from the belief that you are failing at life whenever you do not feel amazing constantly. A practical place to begin is by creating small moments where distraction is no longer immediately available. Not to punish yourself, but to hear yourself more clearly. Walk without consuming content. Sit quietly sometimes. Journal honestly without trying to sound impressive. Pay attention to what thoughts surface when the noise disappears. Many people are frightened of stillness because stillness reveals what constant stimulation was hiding. At the same time, start questioning how much of your life is built around external approval. How much of your identity depends on being admired, productive, attractive, entertaining, or validated? How often do you perform instead of simply existing honestly? These questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always destruction. Sometimes it is awareness beginning. And maybe that is the real reason so many people secretly feel miserable now. Not because they are weak, broken, or incapable of happiness, but because they've spent years drowning their inner world beneath endless distraction, comparison, and performance without realizing how emotionally disconnected they had become from themselves. Because eventually, a person can become so busy consuming the world around them that they quietly lose contact with the life happening inside them.